Zoe Williams never imagined her first day as an intern at Blackwood Corporation would end with her hiding behind a navy velvet curtain, trying not to sneeze from decades of accumulated dust. It all started when she spilled scalding coffee down her pristine white blouse, the exact blouse she'd splurged on specifically to project competence and professionalism. In absolute panic, she raced through the marble corridors, desperately seeking a restroom, any sanctuary where she could repair the damage before the stain became a permanent testament to her incompetence. Come on, be a bathroom," she muttered, twisting the first polished chrome handle she spotted. Wrong, spectacularly, catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. She hadn't discovered a restroom. She'd invaded what resembled a billionaire's private sanctuary. Polished obsidian floors, towering ebony bookshelves, a desk that could house a small family, and panoramic windows revealing the city spread below like a glittering circuit board. And seated behind that imposing fortress of mahogany, wearing a midnight blue suit that screamed custom tailoring, was the most intimidating man Zoe had ever encountered in her 23 years of existence. Thick black hair styled with military precision, cheekbones that could slice paper, emerald eyes that seemed capable of reading her deepest insecurities and finding them inadequate. Damon Blackwood, the CEO, the shark in an Armani suit, the man who, according to office legends, had built a technology empire from scratch and could reduce grown executives to stammering messes with a single disapproving glance. Zoe stood frozen for exactly 3 heartbeats, enough time for Damon to lift his gaze from the legal document he was reviewing and fix those laser-sharp eyes on her with an expression blending surprise, irritation, and something unreadable. "Yikes!" she yelped, volume completely inappropriate for an executive suite. "Wrong room! Totally, completely wrong!" She spun to flee, but her oversized canvas tote bag, lime green and screaming amateur hour, caught on the door handle. She pulled. Stuck solid, she yanked harder. The bag released suddenly, launching Zoe backward into crash. She demolished an antique jade sculpture perched on a glass pedestal. The priceless artifact exploded across the obsidian floor with a sound like a car accident in a museum. Damon said nothing. He simply observed her with that granite expression that made Zoe feel like an insect pinned to a display board. "I can absolutely replace this," she babbled, dropping to gather the jade fragments. "I'm surprisingly good with superglue. One time I fixed my roommate's laptop screen with craft supplies and duct tape." "Don't." His voice carried quiet authority with a hint of gravel that did unexpected things to Zoe's nervous system. Not unpleasant things, more like aged whiskey, smooth and dangerously appealing. "You'll slice your hands open and bleed all over my Italian leather furniture," he stated, rising with predatory grace. "Which costs more than most graduate degrees." "I'm still paying for my graduate degree," Zoe replied reflexively, still crouched among the jade pieces. "Monthly installments until I'm approximately 90. For a microsecond, she swore she detected the ghost of amusement in his eyes. Almost warmth, almost. "Get up," he ordered, prowling around his desk with calculated steps. "And explain why you're trespassing in my office wearing stained clothing and carrying what appears to be a highlighter-colored disaster bag." Zoe scrambled upright so fast her vision blurred. "I was searching for facilities to clean my shirt because I created a coffee catastrophe and thought maybe... But obviously this isn't the ladies' lounge and I should definitely..." She pivoted toward escape, but his voice stopped her cold. "Hold on." Damon now stood barely 4 feet away, and Zoe caught his scent, something expensive and masculine that made her brain temporarily malfunction. He studied her like a puzzle requiring solving. "You're the new hire. Brand new, like first day and already destroyed irreplaceable art new. And chronically clumsy. Professionally clumsy," she confirmed, staring at his tie instead of those penetrating eyes. "I once tripped over my own shadow, twice in the same day." Damon folded his arms, and Zoe noticed how the gesture emphasized his impressive build. "Focus, Williams." This man probably had her termination papers already drafted. "Your name?" "Zoe Williams." Assignment? Digital marketing. Or former digital marketing, possibly unemployed digital marketing. And why? He said, closing the distance another step. Shouldn't I have you escorted from the building immediately for breaking and entering plus destruction of property? Zoe's mouth went desert dry. Career-ending moment approaching at light speed. If she was going down, might as well make it memorable. Because, she said, summoning courage from parts unknown, I'm apparently the only employee brave enough to accidentally invade your personal space. That kind of fearlessness has to be worth something in the corporate world. Silence stretched between them like a loaded spring. Damon examined her face with scientific intensity, as if cataloging every expression and micro-reaction. Eventually, he spoke. Fascinating. He moved to his communication system. Mrs. Ashworth, postpone my conference call with Tokyo, and please arrange for housekeeping to address some debris in my office. Zoe stared in bewilderment. Wait, does this mean I'm not getting terminated? Damon returned to his command position behind the imposing desk, remaining upright like a general surveying his troops. It means, he announced with deliberate precision, you'll serve as my executive assistant for the next 30 days. What now? Consider it a probationary reassignment. But I'm digital marketing, and I'm basically a walking natural disaster. Exactly my point. This should prove illuminating. Zoe felt like she'd tumbled down a rabbit hole into a reality where chaos theory governed business decisions. This makes zero sense. Comprehension isn't mandatory. Simply arrive tomorrow at 7 sharp, appropriately dressed, minus the neon accessories. And Miss Williams? Yes? Damon's mouth quirked into a barely there smile that sent Zoe's heart rate into dangerous territory. Welcome to the pressure cooker. The next morning, Zoe arrived at Blackwood Corporation at 6:45 a.m., wearing her only remotely professional outfit, a navy blazer borrowed from her sister, 2 sizes too big, and a pencil skirt that made walking feel like participating in a 3-legged race. She'd spent the entire night watching YouTube videos titled Executive Assistant Basics and Corporate Etiquette for Dummies. Result, she was more nervous than a chihuahua at a fireworks show. Damon's executive assistant, Mrs. Ashworth, a silver-haired woman in her 50s with glasses that could probably start fires in direct sunlight, greeted her with a smile that never reached her eyes. Ah, you must be Mr. Blackwood's latest experiment, she said, emphasizing experiment like it was a communicable disease. I'm Zoe Williams, nice to meet you. Mrs. Ashworth evaluated her from head to toe with the clinical precision of a quality control inspector rejecting defective merchandise. Mr. Blackwood is currently in a video conference with our Singapore office. Your first assignment is organizing his weekly schedule. She handed Zoe a binder so thick it could double as a weapon. Zoe opened the binder and... Sweet mother of chaos. It looked like hieroglyphics written during an earthquake. Overlapping meetings, incomprehensible codes, company names in multiple languages, and what appeared to be a color-coding system that would make a rainbow feel inadequate. Any questions? Mrs. Ashworth asked with a predatory grin. Just all of them? Wonderful. Mr. Blackwood despises questions. 20 minutes later, Zoe sat at a tiny desk outside Damon's office, attempting to decode whether Tesla 2 p.m. meant a meeting with the car company or if he was buying an electric vehicle at 2 o'clock. The office door flew open. Williams! Zoe launched from her chair so fast she knocked over the pencil holder. Writing instruments scattered across the floor like miniature missiles. Yes, sir, Mr. Blackwood, boss person. Damon paused in the doorway, watching pencils roll in every direction with an expression mixing resignation and morbid fascination. How long have you worked as an executive assistant? Technically, 37 minutes. Previous experience? Barista at Corner Grind Coffee, but I broke so many mugs they moved me to cashier duty. Then I accidentally overcharged the mayor for a latte. Naturally, Damon sighed, a low rumble that made Zoe feel strangely guilty. Come on, We have a board meeting in 10 minutes. Should I bring anything? Files, notes, a first aid kit? Just try not to demolish anything en route. They navigated the corporate corridors, Zoe practically jogging to match his confident stride. Employees automatically parted when they spotted Damon approaching, like the Red Sea splitting for Moses. But Zoe noticed something curious. They didn't just look intimidated. They appeared respectful, admiring even. "Why does everyone act like you're a walking tornado?" she asked without thinking. Damon slowed his pace. "Excuse me? I mean, you're intense, sure. But you don't seem like the type who kicks puppies for entertainment. So why the mass evacuation whenever you appear? You didn't research me before accepting this position?" "I did, but I only found generic stuff. Visionary leader, tech innovator, transformed startup into global powerhouse. And Google didn't mention whether you have normal hobbies like, I don't know, binge watching Netflix or eating cereal straight from the box." Damon stopped completely. Two executives approaching from the opposite direction executed a sharp 90-degree turn to avoid crossing their path. "You think I watch Netflix? Everyone watches Netflix. It's statistically impossible not to, unless you're an alien." "Are you an alien?" For exactly 1 second, just 1 second, Zoe glimpsed something in his eyes, a flicker of genuine amusement, as if nobody had ever questioned his extraterrestrial status. "I'm not an alien." "That's a relief. Would be awkward explaining to HR that my boss is from another planet." They reached the conference room and Zoe's stomach performed an Olympic-level gymnastics routine. It was a massive oval table surrounded by at least 20 people in expensive suits, all holding tablets and wearing expressions of deadly seriousness. "Mr. Blackwood," said a bald man wearing wire-rimmed glasses, "we were reviewing the quarterly projections." Damon settled into the head chair with the natural authority of someone born to command. Zoe hovered by the door like a lost flamingo. "Sit," Damon said without looking at her. "Where?" Every chair was occupied except one directly beside him. Zoe approached it cautiously, trying to achieve invisibility. Squeak. The leather chair protested under her weight with a sound that echoed through the silent room like a deflating balloon. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled toward her. Zoe smiled weakly and offered a tiny wave. "Hi, I'm new, obviously." The bald executive cleared his throat. "As I was saying, Mr. Blackwood, our competitors are gaining market share in the European sector." Zoe attempted to follow the conversation, but it was like listening to aliens discuss quantum physics in Mandarin. Numbers flew across the table, charts materialized and vanished on screens, and everyone spoke in corporate jargon that seemed designed to confuse normal humans. Then she noticed something. Damon was tense, not visibly. To anyone else, he appeared relaxed and in complete control. But Zoe caught the almost imperceptible drumming of his fingers on the table, the slight tightening of his jaw when certain figures were presented. He was worried. Without thinking, Zoe scribbled on a notepad. "You okay?" She slid the paper discreetly toward him. Damon glanced at the note, then at her with an unreadable expression. He picked up his pen and wrote, "Why do you ask?" "You get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're stressed, like a concerned golden retriever." Zoe watched his shoulders tremble slightly. Was he laughing? Silently, but definitely laughing. Concerned golden retriever? It's endearing, in a terrifying corporate overlord kind of way. Damon shook his head, but Zoe caught the ghost of a genuine smile trying to escape. The meeting dragged on for another torturous hour. Zoe spent the time studying the executive's facial expressions, fascinating as a nature documentary, and trying not to make noise when her stomach growled loud enough to register on seismic equipment. When it finally ended, Damon stood. "Thank you, everyone. Review the proposals and send me detailed reports by Friday." The suits filed out in formation, but Zoe overheard whispers. "Who's the new girl?" Was she passing notes during the meeting? Blackwood seemed different today. When they were alone, Damon turned to her. "Concerned golden retriever?" Zoe blushed crimson. "Sorry, I shouldn't have." It's just, you looked worried and I wanted to, I don't know, help somehow? Help. I realize it sounds ridiculous. You probably know more about business in your pinky finger than I'll learn in 10 lifetimes. But sometimes it helps to have someone who notices things. Damon studied her for a long moment. Nobody's ever called me endearing before. Technically, I said the expression was endearing. You're still completely terrifying. Good to know. They returned to the executive floor in comfortable silence, a different kind of quiet than before. Less tense, more easy. Williams, Damon said as they reached his office. Yes? Schedule lunch for us at Meridian, 1 o'clock. Both of us? Together, like a business lunch? Unless you know another way to eat lunch. Right, lunch. At Meridian. Got it. Zoe paused. What's Meridian? Damon's lips twitched. The restaurant on the 40th floor. This building has 40 floors? 43. Sweet Winchester. I've been taking the elevator to 7 and walking up 6 flights because I thought this was a 13-story building. This time Damon actually smiled. A real, genuine, heart-stopping smile that transformed his entire face from intimidating to devastating. You've been walking 9 flights of stairs every day. Exercise is important. There's a gym on 35. There's a gym in the building where I work. Williams? Yeah? This is going to be an interesting 30 days. At exactly 12:58 p.m., Zoe stood outside Meridian Restaurant wearing her blazer inside out. She'd only noticed in the elevator mirror, clutching a notebook she'd grabbed in panic, and silently rehearsing how to eat soup without making slurping sounds. The restaurant was everything she'd expected from a billionaire's lunch spot. Crystal chandeliers, tables spaced far enough apart for classified conversations, and prices that probably required a small loan. She spotted Damon immediately. He commanded attention even when sitting still, like a magnet for every eye in the room. You're late, he said as she approached, though his watch clearly showed 12:59. I got lost. This building is like a maze designed by someone with a geometry obsession. It's a straight corridor. A very confusing straight corridor. Damon's mouth twitched as he stood to pull out her chair. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentlemanly that Zoe forgot how to sit down properly and basically collapsed into the seat. Smooth, she muttered. Indeed. A waiter materialized instantly, tall, sophisticated with the kind of accent that made ordering coffee sound like poetry. Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood. The usual? Please. And for the lady. Zoe stared at the menu in terror. It was in French or Italian, possibly alien. Everything cost more than her monthly grocery budget. What's good here? Everything, Damon replied, which was exactly zero help. I'll have that one, she said, pointing randomly at something called coq au vin. The waiter nodded approvingly and glided away. Do you know what you just ordered? Damon asked. Something French? Chicken and wine sauce. I can handle chicken. Chicken and I are friends. The wine is cooked off. Even better. No accidental intoxication during my first business lunch. Damon leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. Tell me about yourself, Williams. There's really not much to tell. I graduated with a marketing degree, moved here 3 months ago from Ohio, and my greatest life achievement is once eating an entire pizza without getting sauce on my shirt. Ohio. Small town. Population roughly equal to this building's employee count. Family. Parents who think I'm crazy for moving to the big city. One sister who's a successful lawyer and makes me look like a disaster by comparison, and a cat named Pixel who judges my life choices. Pixel. He came with the name, Shelter Cat. We're both works in progress. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their drinks. Zoe watched in fascination as Damon's mineral water was served in a glass that probably cost more than her shoes. What about you? She asked. Besides building corporate empires and intimidating employees, what do you do for fun? Fun? Zoe stared at him. You know, enjoyable activities, hobbies, things that make you smile. I don't have time for hobbies. Everyone has time for something. You can't work 24 hours a day. I work about 18 hours a day. That's not healthy. When do you sleep? 4 to 5 hours, sometimes 6 on weekends. Sweet mother of insomnia. No wonder you look like a concerned golden retriever during meetings. You're probably running on caffeine and sheer willpower. Damon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. You're very direct. My filter broke somewhere around age 12. Most people find it annoying. I find it refreshing. Their food arrived with ceremonial precision. Zoe's chicken looked like art, too beautiful to eat. She picked up her fork and immediately knocked over her water glass. Ice and water cascaded across the white tablecloth like a miniature waterfall, heading straight for Damon's expensive suit. No, no, no! Zoe lunged forward to stop the flood, knocking her own plate in the process. Coco vin splattered across the table in a spectacular display of culinary chaos. The entire restaurant went silent. Wealthy patrons turned to stare at their table like they were watching a nature documentary about disasters in the wild. I am so sorry, Zoe whispered, grabbing napkins and making everything worse. I'm like a natural disaster with legs. But instead of anger, she heard something unexpected. Laughter. Deep, rich, genuine laughter that made every woman in the restaurant turn to look at Damon with newfound interest. You're laughing, Zoe said, amazed. You just destroyed a $40 entree in under 30 seconds. It's actually impressive. I have a gift. The waiter appeared with superhuman speed, cleaning up the chaos with professional efficiency, while murmuring soothing words about accidents happening to everyone. Perhaps we should order something less mobile, Damon suggested. Sandwiches? Sandwiches. As they waited for replacement food, something had shifted between them. The conversation flowed easier, like they'd crossed some invisible barrier. Can I ask you something? Zoe said. You're going to anyway. Why did you really make me your assistant? And don't say it's because I'm not afraid of you, because that's clearly not the whole story. Damon was quiet for so long Zoe thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only tell you what they think you want to hear? No, but it sounds lonely. It is. Yesterday you walked into my office, destroyed priceless art, and then had the audacity to tell me I wasn't as scary as everyone thinks. You treated me like a person instead of a position. You are a person. A workaholic person with questionable sleep habits, but still human. My board thinks I'm a machine. My employees think I'm a tyrant. My competitors think I'm ruthless. What do you think you are? Damon met her eyes directly. I have no idea anymore. The vulnerability in his voice hit Zoe like a physical force. This wasn't the intimidating CEO or the corporate legend. This was just a guy who'd forgotten how to be human. Well, she said softly, for what it's worth, I think you're someone who cares too much about doing everything perfectly. Which isn't a bad thing, but maybe exhausting? Their sandwiches arrived, blessedly spill-proof. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Damon spoke again. The Singapore deal isn't going well. The one from this morning's meeting? We're losing ground to our main competitor. If we don't turn it around in the next 2 weeks, we'll lose a contract worth $50 million. That sounds significant. It could affect everyone's jobs, including yours. Zoe set down her sandwich. Is that why you looked worried during the meeting? Partly. What's the other part? Damon hesitated. I'm not used to having someone notice when I'm worried. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Well, Zoe said finally, lucky for you I'm excellent at noticing things. Terrible at everything else, but very observant. I'm beginning to realize that. As they finished lunch, Zoe caught herself studying Damon's profile when he wasn't looking. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he almost smiled, the unconscious elegance of his movements. Dangerous territory, Williams. We should head back, Damon said, checking his watch. Right. Back to the corporate salt mines. Zoe? It was the first time he'd used her first name, and it sent an unexpected warm flutter through her chest. Yeah? Thank you. For lunch, and for noticing. Anytime, boss. As they walked back through the restaurant, Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. The chemistry she'd been trying to ignore was getting harder to dismiss. And judging by the way Damon kept glancing at her, she wasn't the only one feeling it. Day 12 of Zoe's 30-day trial period started like any other, with her arriving at the office carrying coffee for both herself and Damon, a habit that had developed naturally over the past week and a half. What she didn't expect was to find Mrs. Ashworth standing outside Damon's office at 6:30 a.m., looking like she'd seen a corporate apocalypse. "Miss Williams, thank goodness you're here," the usually unflappable assistant said, her silver hair slightly mussed. "We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" Scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being someone used the wrong font in a memo, and 10 being the building is literally on fire. 11. Zoe nearly dropped both coffee cups. What happened? The Singapore presentation. The one Mr. Blackwood has been preparing for weeks? The file corrupted. All of it. Gone. And the backup server crashed overnight. Sweet Lincoln's ghost. Zoe breathed. When's the presentation? Video conference in 4 hours. With the entire Singapore board, 3 potential investors, and our biggest competitor presenting right after us. Through the glass walls of Damon's office, Zoe could see him on the phone, his usual controlled demeanor replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. His hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, his tie was loosened, and he was pacing like a caged tiger. How much of the presentation can be recovered? About 30%. Maybe 40 if we're lucky. Zoe set down the coffee cups and rolled up her sleeves. Okay, what do we need to rebuild it? Mrs. Ashworth blinked in surprise. We. You didn't think I was going to let him face this alone, did you? For the first time since Zoe had known her, Mrs. Ashworth smiled genuinely. The financial projections are in his personal files. The market analysis is in the Singapore folder on the shared drive, and the competitive analysis. She paused. Was supposed to be delivered by the research team yesterday. Was supposed to be? They're running behind. Something about needing more data verification. Zoe felt a familiar surge of determination. The same feeling she'd had in college when her entire senior thesis had disappeared 12 hours before the deadline. Get me access to everything we have. I'll need coffee, all the Red Bull in the building, and someone to explain to me how corporate presentations work. Miss Williams, you're not seriously thinking of rebuilding a $50 million presentation in 4 hours? Absolutely I am. The next 3 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Zoe discovered she had a previously unknown talent for synthesizing complex business data into comprehensible narratives. Maybe it was her marketing background, or maybe it was sheer terror-induced adrenaline, but she found herself creating slides, charts, and graphs at a speed that impressed even Mrs. Ashworth. Damon emerged from his office every 30 minutes looking increasingly frazzled. His usual pristine appearance had given way to rolled-up sleeves, a loosened tie, and hair that suggested he'd been electrocuted. "How bad is it?" he asked during his 3rd check-in. "On a scale of minor setback to career-ending catastrophe?" Zoe looked up from her laptop, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and crumpled papers. "We're hovering somewhere around challenging but not impossible." "That's optimistic. I specialize in optimistic disasters." Damon moved closer to look at her screen, and Zoe became acutely aware of his cologne mixed with stress, sweat, and desperation. Not unpleasant, just intensely masculine and distracting. "You redesigned the entire market analysis section," he said, his voice carrying a note of amazement. "I may have made some creative interpretations of the data." "Creative how?" "Well, instead of just showing numbers, I created a narrative. Look, she clicked through several slides. The Singapore market isn't just growing, it's evolving. Your competitors are treating it like it's still 2015, but you're positioning Blackwood Corporation for where the market is going, not where it's been. Damon stared at the screen in silence for so long that Zoe started to worry she'd completely misunderstood everything. "This is brilliant," he said finally. "Really? Because I was mostly guessing and hoping I didn't accidentally promise to deliver products that don't exist." "You didn't. You did something better. You told a story that makes our bid irresistible." The compliment sent a warm flush through Zoe's chest that had nothing to do with the caffeine overdose she was experiencing. "We still need the competitive analysis," she said, trying to focus on business instead of how close Damon was standing. "Leave that to me. I'll handle our competitors." At exactly 10:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the presentation was scheduled to begin, disaster struck again. "Mr. Blackwood." Mrs. Ashworth's voice carried a note of hysteria usually reserved for natural disasters. "The video conferencing system is down. Building-wide network failure." Zoe watched Damon's face cycle through several emotions: disbelief, fury, resignation, and finally, grim determination. "Backup plan?" he asked. "There is no backup plan for a complete network failure," Mrs. Ashworth replied. "Wait," Zoe said, an idea forming. "My laptop has a mobile hotspot, and I've got unlimited data because I stream way too much Netflix." "Your Netflix addiction might save a $50 million deal? Stranger things have happened, literally. I've watched that show 12 times. They spent the next 10 minutes in a frantic technical setup that involved Zoe's laptop, 2 borrowed tablets, 3 different phone chargers, and what appeared to be half the IT department crammed into Damon's office. "Testing, testing," Zoe spoke into her laptop microphone. "Singapore, can you hear us?" A chorus of voices responded through the speakers. "Loud and clear, Blackwood Corporation." Damon straightened his tie, ran a hand through his hair one final time, and transformed back into the commanding CEO Zoe had first met. Except now she could see the vulnerability underneath the confidence, the humanity beneath the corporate armor. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties." What followed was 45 minutes of the most impressive business presentation Zoe had ever witnessed. Damon moved through the slides with practiced ease, explaining complex market strategies like he was telling an adventure story. He was confident, persuasive, and absolutely magnetic. And every time he clicked to one of the slides Zoe had created, he glanced at her with an expression that made her heart skip beats. "As you can see from our market evolution analysis," Damon was saying, "Blackwood Corporation isn't just prepared for Singapore's current business climate. We're positioned to grow with the market as it develops over the next decade." One of the Singapore board members spoke up. "This approach is quite different from your competitors' presentations. More visionary." "We believe in looking forward, not backward," Damon replied smoothly. The questions that followed were sharp, detailed, and occasionally aggressive. But Damon handled each one with the skill of a master diplomat, often referring to data that Zoe had compiled in the pre-dawn hours. Finally, the Singapore team signed off with promises to discuss internally and respond within 48 hours. Damon closed the laptop and sank into his chair like a deflated balloon. "Well?" Zoe asked. "We won't know for 2 days, but..." He looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I think we actually pulled it off." "We?" "There's no way I could have done this without you. The presentation you built in 3 hours was better than what my team had been working on for weeks." Zoe felt a dangerous flutter in her chest. "I just reorganized what was already there." "You did more than that. You saw the story and the data. You made it compelling." Damon stood up, moving closer until they were only a few feet apart. "You saved the deal, Zoe." The way he said her name with gratitude and something deeper made Zoe's brain temporarily malfunction. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is supposed to be scheduling my meetings and answering my phone." "Right. I should probably go back to doing that before someone notices I've been playing executive consultant." "About that." Damon moved even closer, and Zoe could see the golden flecks in his green eyes. I don't think assistant is the right title for you anymore. What do you mean? I mean I want to offer you a permanent position, senior strategy coordinator, real salary, benefits, your own office. Zoe stared at him in shock. Are you serious? Completely serious. But what about my 30-day trial? Consider it completed successfully. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something electric and dangerous. Zoe was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how Damon's eyes kept flickering to her lips, how her own heart was beating fast enough to power a small generator. Zoe, he said softly, yeah, thank you for everything. Before she could respond, before she could think about corporate policy or professional boundaries or any of the 1,000 reasons why it was a terrible idea, Damon leaned down and kissed her. It was soft, gentle, and completely perfect. For about 3 seconds. Then the office door burst open. Mr. Blackwood, I have the quarterly reports. Mrs. Ashworth stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Oh my. Zoe and Damon sprang apart like they'd been electrocuted. Mrs. Ashworth, Damon said, his voice remarkably steady for someone who'd just been caught kissing his assistant. Perhaps we could discuss the quarterly reports later. Of course, sir. Much later. Very much later. She backed out of the office, closing the door with exaggerated care. Zoe covered her face with her hands. She's going to tell everyone. Mrs. Ashworth is the soul of discretion. She's going to tell everyone by lunchtime. Probably. This is a disaster. Actually, Damon said, his voice carrying a note of amusement, I think this is the best disaster we've had yet. Zoe peeked at him through her fingers. You're not worried about the corporate gossip mill? I'm more worried about whether you're going to accept my job offer. The promotion? And the other implications. Zoe understood what he was asking. The job offer wasn't just about work anymore. It was about whatever was happening between them, whatever had been building since that first day when she'd crashed into his office and turned his orderly world upside down. Damon, she said carefully, this is complicated. The best things usually are. What if the Singapore deal falls through? What if this whole thing was just adrenaline and stress and proximity? Then we'll figure it out together. The simple confidence in his voice made Zoe's remaining resistance crumble. Okay, she said. Okay to the job? Okay to all of it. This time, when Damon smiled, it was like the sun coming out after a storm. And when he kissed her again, Zoe didn't care who might walk through the door. Some disasters, she was learning, were worth the chaos they created. By 10:47 a.m. the following morning, exactly 18 hours and 23 minutes after Mrs. Ashworth had witnessed what the office grapevine was already calling the kiss that broke corporate protocol, Zoe discovered that becoming the subject of company-wide gossip was roughly equivalent to being trapped in a fishbowl filled with piranhas. She first noticed something was wrong when she stepped off the elevator on the 32nd floor, and the entire marketing department suddenly went silent. Not the normal, polite quiet of people pretending to work while actually checking social media. This was the loaded silence of people who had been actively discussing her and were now trying to pretend they hadn't been. Morning, everyone, she said cheerfully, determined to act normal despite the fact that her stomach felt like it was hosting a gymnastics competition. A chorus of overly enthusiastic responses followed. Good morning, Zoe. How are you today, Zoe? Beautiful weather we're having, isn't it, Zoe? The last comment came from Marcus Chen, who worked 3 cubicles down and had never voluntarily spoken to her before. He was also staring at her like she'd grown a second head overnight. Zoe made it to her desk, the small one outside Damon's office that she'd been secretly hoping to keep even after her promotion to senior strategy coordinator, and found a stack of congratulations cards that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Congratulations on your promotion, read the first one. Way to climb the corporate ladder, said the second. The third one made her choke on her coffee. We always knew you had it in you to reach the top. The double entendres were apparently starting early today. Miss Williams? Mrs. Ashworth appeared at her elbow with the stealth of a ninja and the expression of someone who'd been fielding uncomfortable questions for the past hour. Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his office. Immediately. Is he angry? Difficult to say. He's been on conference calls since 6 a.m., and I haven't seen him drink his usual amount of coffee, which is either a very good sign or a very bad one. Zoe knocked on Damon's door and entered to find him standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city with his hands clasped behind his back. His posture was rigid, controlled, and completely unreadable. You wanted to see me? He turned and Zoe felt her breath catch. Even stressed and sleep-deprived, the man was unfairly attractive. His dark hair was slightly mussed, suggesting he'd been running his hands through it, and his usually perfect tie was loosened just enough to make him look human instead of corporate perfection. How much of the office gossip have you heard this morning? Enough to know that our moment yesterday has become public knowledge. Mrs. Ashworth assured me she hadn't told anyone. Mrs. Ashworth didn't need to tell anyone. Apparently Jeffrey from IT was doing maintenance in the adjacent office and heard everything through the air vents. Everything? The kiss, the job offer, the part where you called me the best disaster you've had yet. Zoe sank into the chair across from his desk. How bad is it? Well, HR wants to see both of us at 2 p.m. for what they're calling a policy clarification meeting. The board is asking questions about my decision-making process regarding personnel changes. And I've had 3 different department heads ask me if the company is implementing a new mentorship program. Mentorship program? Apparently that's the euphemism they're using for our relationship. Zoe felt heat rise in her cheeks. What did you tell them? That my personal life is not subject to board approval, and that your promotion was based entirely on merit, which they can verify by reviewing the Singapore presentation you created. And they believed you? Damon moved to sit on the edge of his desk, close enough that Zoe could see the exhaustion in his eyes. They want to believe me. The Singapore team called this morning with preliminary feedback, and it's overwhelmingly positive. You may have single-handedly saved the biggest deal in our company's history. We saved it, together. Which brings me to our current problem. Damon ran a hand through his hair, confirming Zoe's theory about why it looked disheveled. The board is concerned about the optics of our situation. What kind of optics? The kind where the CEO appears to be trading promotions for personal favors. Zoe felt like she'd been slapped. They think I slept my way into a promotion? Some of them, yes. Even though I've been working 18-hour days for 2 weeks, even though I rebuilt an entire presentation in 3 hours, even though I've proven myself over and over again, logic isn't always the driving force in corporate politics. Zoe stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows. So what do we do? Pretend yesterday never happened? Go back to being boss and assistant and ignore the fact that there's something real happening between us? I don't know. The honesty in his voice made her turn around. Damon looked as confused and frustrated as she felt. You don't know? I've never been in this situation before, Zoe. I've never let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. I've never kissed an employee in my office. I've never cared more about someone's opinion than the board's approval. And how does that make you feel? Terrified. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Before Zoe could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. What's happening? Damon asked. Zoe looked at her phone and felt her stomach drop to approximately floor level. Someone posted a picture. What kind of picture? She turned her phone screen toward him. There, in full color and unfortunately high resolution, was a photo of them in the restaurant yesterday. Damon was leaning across the table, smiling genuinely, while Zoe gestured animatedly with her fork. They looked intimate, happy, like a couple. Where did this come from? Someone tagged the company's social media page. It's already been shared 47 times. Damon closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. This is getting out of control. It gets worse. How could it possibly get worse? Zoe scrolled through her messages. My sister texted me. Apparently one of her law school friends saw the photo and recognized me. She wants to know when I was planning to mention that I was dating a billionaire CEO. Your family doesn't know about us? There isn't an us to know about. We kissed once yesterday during a moment of adrenaline-fueled insanity. Is that all it was to you? Adrenaline. The question came out quietly, but Zoe could hear the vulnerability underneath. She looked at Damon, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and corporate confidence to the man who'd shared his loneliness with her over lunch, who'd trusted her with his biggest business crisis, who'd made her feel valuable and appreciated for the first time in her professional life. No, she said softly, it wasn't just adrenaline. Then what was it? It was terrifying and wonderful and completely inappropriate, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since it happened. Something shifted in Damon's expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it either. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Mrs. Ashworth entered without waiting for permission, which was so unlike her that both Zoe and Damon immediately knew something was seriously wrong. "Sir, we have a problem." "Another one?" "Victoria Sterling is here." Damon went completely still. Victoria is here, in the building, on her way up in the elevator as we speak. "Who's Victoria Sterling?" Zoe asked. Damon and Mrs. Ashworth exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. "My ex-fiancée," Damon said finally. "We were engaged 3 years ago. She ended it when she decided my work schedule was incompatible with her social calendar. And she's here because, Mrs. Ashworth said grimly. She saw the social media posts and called the office this morning asking about your relationship status, Mr. Blackwood. When I told her you were unavailable for personal calls, she said she'd drive down from Boston to discuss it in person." "Sweet Roosevelt's mustache," Zoe breathed. "Your ex-fiancé is coming here because of our fake relationship that isn't fake but also isn't real." That's actually a surprisingly accurate summary of the situation. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by the sound of high heels clicking across marble floors with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. "What's she like?" Zoe asked. "Beautiful, wealthy, socially connected, and completely ruthless when she wants something." "What does she want?" "Me, apparently." The clicking heels were getting closer, accompanied by a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Where is Damon's office?" "I know he's here. His car is in the executive parking garage." 30 seconds, Mrs. Ashworth whispered, then fled toward her desk like a soldier abandoning a battlefield. "What do we do?" Zoe asked. "We face this together," Damon said, straightening his tie and transforming back into CEO mode. "Whatever happens, whatever she says, we present a united front. Are you sure? Because I'm not exactly equipped to handle Boston socialite warfare. You rebuilt a $50 million presentation in 3 hours and saved our biggest client. I think you can handle one ex-fiancé." The office door swung open without a knock, and Victoria Sterling walked in like she owned the building. She was everything Damon had described and more, tall, elegant, perfectly put together in a way that probably required a team of professionals. Her blonde hair was styled in a sophisticated chignon. Her cream-colored suit probably cost more than Zoe's car payment, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Damon, darling," she said, gliding across the office like she was walking a red carpet. "You look wonderful. Corporate success suits you." "Victoria." Damon's voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I hope you don't mind." Her eyes found Zoe and performed a rapid, thorough assessment that made Zoe feel like a discount store item, being evaluated by a luxury boutique owner. "And you must be the assistant I've been hearing so much about." "Senior Strategy Coordinator," Zoe corrected automatically, "as of yesterday." "How fascinating, such a rapid promotion." Victoria's smile never wavered, but there was steel underneath the politeness. "I'm Victoria Sterling, an old friend of Damon's." "Very old," Damon said dryly. "We have so much history together," Victoria continued, ignoring the comment. 3 years of engagement, all those wonderful times we shared. I've been thinking lately that perhaps I was hasty in my decision to end things. The words hit the office like a bombshell. Zoe felt her stomach clench as she watched Victoria move closer to Damon, her body language screaming possession and familiarity. People change, Damon. Priorities shift. I've had time to reconsider what's truly important in life. And what conclusion did you reach? Damon asked. That love is more valuable than convenience, that what we had was special and worth fighting for. Zoe wanted to disappear into the floor. This was a private conversation between two people with serious history, and she was an intruder. But before she could excuse herself, Damon's hand found hers. Victoria, I'd like you to meet Zoe Williams. She's not just my strategy coordinator. She's someone very important to me. The simple statement sent warmth flooding through Zoe's chest, even as she watched Victoria's perfect composure crack slightly. Important how exactly? Important in every way that matters. Victoria's gaze sharpened, focusing on their joined hands like a laser targeting system. I see. And how long has this importance been developing? Long enough to know it's real, Damon said firmly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria's mask of polite sophistication was slipping, revealing something calculating and dangerous underneath. Well, she said finally, this is certainly an interesting development. I suppose congratulations are in order. Thank you, Zoe managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I do hope you understand what you're getting into, dear. Damon can be quite demanding. His work always comes first. Always. I learned that the hard way. Things change, Zoe said quietly. People grow. Some people, Victoria agreed. Others simply find new ways to repeat old patterns. She turned back to Damon with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I should go. I wouldn't want to interrupt your important business meeting. Victoria, no need to see me out, darling. I know my way around your office. After all, I used to redecorate it every few months when we were together. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Damon, the Pemberton Charity Gala is next weekend. I assume you'll be attending as usual? Perhaps with your coordinator? The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just a social invitation. It was a declaration of war. We'll be there, Damon said without hesitation. Wonderful. I look forward to introducing Zoe to Boston society. I'm sure they'll find her absolutely fascinating. And with that parting shot, Victoria Sterling swept out of the office, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and the distinct impression that the real battle was just beginning. Zoe sank into the nearest chair. What just happened? We were just formally challenged to a duel. A social duel? The most dangerous kind. Victoria Sterling doesn't lose gracefully, and she doesn't give up easily. If she's decided she wants me back, she'll use every weapon in her considerable arsenal to get rid of you. And what weapons does she have? Damon looked grim. Money, social connections, family influence, and 3 years of intimate knowledge about my weaknesses. What are your weaknesses? Apparently you. The admission sent a shiver through Zoe that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way Damon was looking at her, like she was worth fighting for. So what do we do now? Now, Damon said, moving closer until he was standing directly in front of her. We decide if what we have is worth the war that's coming. Is it? Instead of answering with words, Damon cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. This time there was no hesitation, no gentle exploration. This was a claim, a promise, and a declaration all rolled into one earth-shaking moment. When they broke apart, Zoe was breathing hard and completely certain of one thing. Whatever Victoria Sterling had planned, she was ready for the fight. Yes, she said against his lips. It's definitely worth the war. The Pemberton Charity Gala was exactly the kind of event that made Zoe break out in stress-induced hives. 300 of Boston's wealthiest and most influential people gathered in a ballroom that cost more to rent for one evening than most people made in a year. All wearing designer gowns and tuxedos that could fund a small college education, engaging in the kind of polite social warfare that could destroy careers and reputations with a single well-placed whisper. Standing outside the marble columns of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, wearing a midnight blue gown that Damon had insisted on buying for her, despite her protests about accepting expensive gifts. Zoe felt like she was about to walk into a lion's den armed with nothing but a paperclip and some cheerful optimism. "I can't do this," she said for the 14th time in the past hour, clutching Damon's arm like it was a life preserver. "I don't know how to talk to these people. I don't know which fork to use for the salad course. I once asked a Supreme Court justice if he wanted extra cheese on his burger, because I thought he was someone's uncle at a family barbecue." "You'll be fine," Damon said, adjusting his bow tie with the calm confidence of someone who'd attended approximately 200 similar events. "Just be yourself." "Myself is a disaster magnet who trips over flat surfaces and accidentally insults important people. That's not exactly ideal gala behavior. Your disaster-prone nature is part of your charm. Easy for you to say. You didn't spend 3 hours this afternoon watching YouTube videos about proper etiquette and practicing how to hold a champagne glass without looking like you're drinking from a sippy cup." Damon stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands settling on her shoulders with a gentleness that still surprised her after 3 weeks of knowing him. In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, with his dark hair styled to perfection, and those green eyes focused entirely on her, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about impossibly attractive billionaires. "Zoe, listen to me. You rebuilt a $50 million presentation in 3 hours. You saved our biggest client. You stood up to Victoria Sterling without backing down. You can handle one charity gala. Victoria Sterling went to boarding school with these people. She knows their secrets, their families, their weaknesses. I know how to make a really good grilled cheese sandwich and the complete plot of every romantic comedy made between 1995 and 2010. Those are valuable skills. Not at a charity gala, they're not." "Hey." Damon lifted her chin until she was looking directly into his eyes. "You are brilliant, capable, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. And if anyone gives you trouble tonight, they'll have to deal with me." The protective edge in his voice sent a warm flutter through Zoe's stomach that had nothing to do with pre-gala nerves and everything to do with the way he was looking at her like she was worth defending against the entire Boston social establishment. "Besides," he added with a small smile, "what's the worst that could happen?" "Don't say that. Don't ever say that. That's like asking the universe to prove you wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Too late now. We're going in." The ballroom was a masterpiece of understated elegance, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in cream silk, enormous floral arrangements that probably cost more than Zoe's monthly rent, and a string quartet playing classical music that created the perfect background for conversations about yacht purchases and summer homes in the Hamptons. Zoe had attended exactly 2 formal events in her life: her cousin's wedding, where she'd accidentally caught the bouquet and spent the rest of the evening hiding from single men, and her college graduation dinner, where she'd spilled red wine on the dean's wife. This was several leagues beyond her experience level. "Mr. Blackwood, how wonderful to see you again." They were immediately surrounded by a group of well-dressed couples, who greeted Damon with the kind of familiarity that came from years of shared social circles. Zoe found herself introduced as "my girlfriend, Zoe Williams," approximately 17 times in the first 10 minutes, each introduction followed by polite smiles and evaluating looks that made her feel like a specimen in a particularly exclusive laboratory. "And what do you do, dear?" asked Mrs. Pemberton, the gala's hostess, a woman in her 70s with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded automatic respect. "I'm a senior strategy coordinator at Blackwood Corporation," Zoe replied, grateful that she'd practiced this answer in the mirror. "How interesting. And how did you and Damon meet? I accidentally broke into his office and destroyed priceless art. The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them. Damon's hand tightened slightly on her arm, but his expression remained perfectly calm. Mrs. Pemberton blinked once, twice, then threw back her head and laughed with genuine delight. My dear, that's the most honest answer I've heard all evening. Most people would have invented some boring story about meeting at a business conference. I don't really do boring stories, Zoe admitted. I can tell. I like you already. The conversation continued pleasantly for several more minutes before Mrs. Pemberton was called away to greet other guests. As she left, she squeezed Zoe's hand and whispered, "Don't let the vultures intimidate you, dear. You're exactly what that boy needs." "The vultures?" Zoe asked Damon as they moved toward the bar. "Boston society women who've been trying to set me up with their daughters for the past 3 years. Since Victoria? Since Victoria. They ordered drinks, champagne for her, scotch for him, and found a relatively quiet corner where Zoe could observe the social dynamics without feeling like she was on display. It was fascinating, really, watching people who had elevated small talk to an art form navigate conversations that seemed casual, but were actually complex negotiations about business deals, social standing, and family alliances. "You're studying them like they're a different species," Damon observed. "They kind of are. Look at that woman over there in the silver dress. She's been having the same conversation with 3 different people, but she's gathering information each time. And that man by the dessert table has been approached by 4 different couples who all want something from him. You're very observant. It's like watching a nature documentary about corporate predators in their natural habitat. And what does that make me?" Zoe considered this seriously. "The alpha predator that all the other predators want to either eliminate or mate with." Damon nearly choked on his scotch. "Mate with? It's a scientific term." "Is it?" "Probably." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a waiter carrying a silver tray with a single champagne flute and an elegant white card. "For the lady," the waiter said, presenting the tray with practiced precision. Zoe took the card and read the embossed text. "Looking forward to chatting later. V.S." "She's here," Damon said grimly. "Where?" "There, by the grand piano." Zoe followed his gaze and felt her stomach clench. Victoria Sterling stood near the baby grand piano, wearing a gown that probably cost more than Zoe's college tuition. She was surrounded by a group of elegantly dressed women who hung on her every word, and when she spotted Zoe looking in her direction, she raised her own champagne glass in a mock toast. "She looks like she's holding court." Because she is. Half the women in this room went to school with her, and the other half want to be her. Victoria has social influence that money can't buy. What's our strategy? We avoid her as long as possible and hope she gets bored and leaves early. That doesn't sound like much of a strategy. It's the best I've got. They managed to avoid Victoria for exactly 47 minutes. Zoe knew this because she'd been timing it, watching as Victoria worked the room with the skill of a master politician, getting closer to their position with each conversation. The confrontation finally came when they were cornered at the silent auction tables, examining a vacation package to Tuscany that cost more than Zoe's annual salary. "Damon, darling, there you are." Victoria approached with 3 other women in tow, all of whom looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine spread. Her red hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement, and her emerald green gown made her look like a sophisticated mermaid. "Victoria," Damon replied politely, "you look lovely." "Thank you. I'd like you to meet my friends, Arabella Whitman, Stephanie Chen Morrison, and Caroline Ashford. Girls, this is Damon Blackwood, the brilliant CEO I've told you so much about." The women smiled with the kind of perfectly practiced expressions that probably required years of finishing school training. "And you must be Zoe," Victoria continued, her attention turning with laser focus. "I've been dying to hear more about your fascinating background." "It's not that fascinating," Zoe said carefully. "Oh, but I think it is. Arabella was just telling me about her daughter's gap year before Harvard. She worked as an intern at a non-profit in Guatemala. So admirable when young people gain real-world experience before settling into their careers. The implication was clear. Zoe was just a temporary adventure before Damon settled down with someone appropriate. I'm sure it was a wonderful experience for her, Zoe replied evenly. And what did you do before your current position? Stephanie asked with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was a barista. How grounding, Caroline said, managing to make the word sound like an insult. Coffee service is such important work, Victoria added with fake sincerity. Someone has to keep the real professionals caffeinated. Zoe felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Damon stepped closer to her side. Zoe rebuilt our Singapore presentation and saved a $50 million deal, he said calmly. She's one of the most naturally talented strategists I've ever worked with. How wonderful that you're giving her opportunities to grow, Victoria said smoothly. It's so important to mentor young people, especially those from different backgrounds. The condescension in her voice was barely veiled, and Zoe felt her temper begin to simmer. Different how? She asked. Oh, you know, different educational experiences, different social circles. It must be quite an adjustment, moving in these kinds of professional environments. Actually, I find that diverse perspectives often lead to better solutions than groupthink, Zoe said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Sometimes the best ideas come from people who haven't been trained to think inside traditional boxes. How refreshing, Arabella said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Such an optimistic view. It's not optimism, it's results. The Singapore deal that Damon mentioned? It worked because I approached the problem differently than the team that had been working on it for months. I'm sure Damon's guidance was invaluable, Stephanie said pointedly. Actually, she did most of the work herself, Damon interjected. In 3 hours, under incredible pressure, while our entire network system was down. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. How remarkable. And tell me, Zoe, what are your long-term career goals? I imagine working so closely with Damon has given you interesting insights into the corporate world. The question was loaded with implications, and Zoe suddenly understood that this wasn't just social small talk. This was an interrogation designed to establish whether she was a serious threat or just a temporary inconvenience. I want to continue growing professionally and contributing to the company's success, Zoe said carefully. And personally, do you see yourself staying in Boston long term? Zoe glanced at Damon, who was watching the exchange with growing tension in his jaw. I see myself wherever my career and personal relationships take me, she said finally. How wonderfully flexible. Of course, Boston can be quite challenging for people who aren't from here originally. The social expectations, the cultural nuances, it takes years to really feel at home. I'm sure Zoe will adapt just fine, Damon said, his voice carrying a warning edge. Oh, I have no doubt she's very adaptable, Victoria replied, with a smile that could have powered a small city. Some people are natural chameleons. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took Zoe a moment to process it. Victoria had just called her fake, a social climber who changed her personality to fit her circumstances. You know what? Zoe said, her polite mask finally slipping. You're absolutely right. I am adaptable. I adapted when my college boyfriend dumped me via text message. I adapted when I got laid off from my first job because the company was downsizing. I adapted when I moved to a new city where I didn't know anyone. And I'm adapting to working in a corporate environment where people think that being born into wealth is more valuable than actual talent or hard work. The group had gone completely silent. Other conversations nearby were starting to quiet as people sensed drama unfolding. But you know what I don't adapt to? Zoe continued, her voice gaining strength. People who think their trust funds make them better than everyone else. People who use politeness as a weapon to make others feel small. And people who can't accept that sometimes the best person for the job or the relationship isn't who you expected. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "How charmingly passionate," she said, though perhaps a bit inappropriate for the setting. "You started this conversation," Zoe pointed out. "I'm just finishing it." "Ladies," Damon said firmly, "perhaps we should—" He was interrupted by a loud crash from across the ballroom. A waiter had tripped while carrying a tray of champagne glasses, sending crystal and alcohol cascading across the marble floor in a spectacular display of destruction. The sound broke the tension like a fire alarm, and people immediately turned their attention to the more interesting drama of expensive stemware meeting an immovable floor. "Well," Victoria said, her social mask sliding back into place, "accidents do happen. I suppose we should all be more careful about our surroundings." The comment was clearly directed at Zoe, who had become famous in the office for her own spectacular accidents. "Yes," Zoe agreed pleasantly. "We should all be careful about stepping in broken glass. It can be very cutting." Victoria's eyes narrowed, recognizing the counter-threat. "Indeed. Well, it's been lovely chatting, but I see the Ashfords across the room and I simply must say hello. Enjoy the rest of your evening." She glided away with her entourage in tow, leaving Zoe and Damon standing alone by the silent auction tables. "That was," Damon began, "a complete disaster?" "I was going to say impressive. You held your own against Victoria Sterling and her entire social army. I basically insulted half the people in this room. You stood up for yourself. There's a difference. Your ex-fiancé officially hates me now. My ex-fiancé hated you before you said a word. At least now she knows you're not going to be intimidated." They were interrupted by Mrs. Pemberton, who appeared at Zoe's elbow with a glass of champagne and a conspiratorial smile. "My dear, that was the most entertaining thing I've seen at one of these events in decades. I'm sorry if I caused a scene. Don't apologize. Victoria Sterling has been the unchallenged queen of this social circle for far too long. It was refreshing to see someone call her on her behavior. I probably shouldn't have lost my temper. Nonsense. Sometimes a little honesty is exactly what these gatherings need. Besides, I heard about your Singapore presentation from my husband. He's on Blackwood Corporation's board. $50 million, they're saying. It was a team effort. I'm sure it was, but I have a feeling you were the driving force." Mrs. Pemberton patted Zoe's arm. "Don't let the social vultures discourage you, dear. You belong here as much as anyone else." As she walked away, Zoe felt some of her confidence returning. "She's right, you know," Damon said quietly. "You do belong here. Even after I basically declared war on your ex-fiancé in front of Boston's social elite? Especially after that." The rest of the evening passed more smoothly. Victoria kept her distance, though Zoe could feel her watching from across the room like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. They ate dinner at a table with other Blackwood Corporation board members and their spouses, where Zoe found herself discussing marketing strategies and business development with people who actually valued her opinions. It was nearly midnight when they finally left the gala, walking through the hotel lobby toward the valet station, where Damon's car was waiting. "So," Zoe said as they stepped into the cool night air, "on a scale of minor social faux pas to complete career suicide, how bad was tonight?" "Honestly, I think you impressed more people than you offended." "Really?" "Really. Mrs. Pemberton asked for your business card. James Morrison wants to discuss a consulting opportunity with you, and Dr. Chen told me that his daughter could learn a few things from your backbone." "And Victoria?" "Victoria is probably plotting your social destruction as we speak." Comforting. Damon stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands finding her waist and pulling her closer. "Zoe, I need you to know something." "What?" "Tonight, watching you stand up to Victoria and her friends, seeing you hold your own in that room full of people who have been trying to intimidate me into appropriate relationships for years, I've never been more proud to be with someone. Even though I basically started a social war. Especially because you started a social war. For the first time in my life, I'm with someone who fights for what we have instead of just accepting what other people think we should have. And what do we have exactly? Damon's hands moved up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. We have something real, something worth fighting for, something I never want to lose. Even if it means dealing with more nights like this. Especially if it means more nights like this. You think I care what Victoria Sterling or anyone else thinks about us? A little bit? Not even slightly. Damon leaned down until his forehead was resting against hers. Zoe Williams, you walked into my office 3 weeks ago and turned my entire world upside down. You made me remember what it feels like to laugh, to take risks, to care about something other than profit margins and board approval. You saved my biggest deal and challenged my biggest assumptions about what my life should look like. Is this leading somewhere? It's leading to me asking if you want to find out what happens next. What do you mean? I mean I'm falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling in love with me too, and I want to see where this goes, even if it means facing down every social vulture in New England. Zoe felt her heart stop, restart, and then begin beating double time. You're falling in love with me. Completely, utterly, probably unwisely, given your talent for destroying expensive objects and starting social wars. I love your expensive objects, and your social wars. Does that mean? It means I'm definitely falling in love with you too. Even though you're a workaholic billionaire with questionable taste in ex-fiancés and a tendency to make me want to do things like rebuild presentations and fight Boston socialites. Those sound like excellent qualities in a girlfriend. Girlfriend? If you want to be, officially, with full social war privileges and everything. Zoe laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest where happiness lived alongside the terrifying realization that she was about to change her entire life for a man she'd known for less than a month. Yes, she said. I want to be your girlfriend, even if it means learning proper gala etiquette and buying more expensive dresses. I'll buy you all the expensive dresses you want, and I'll try not to spill things on them. I love it when you spill things. It gives me an excuse to get you new ones. Damon kissed her then, right there on the sidewalk outside the Fairmont Copley Plaza, while the Boston elite streamed past them in their designer gowns and expensive tuxedos. It was the kind of kiss that made Zoe forget about social expectations and appropriate behavior, and the fact that they were probably going to end up in tomorrow's society pages. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard and smiling like idiots, Zoe realized something important. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Victoria Sterling, not of Boston society, not of falling in love with a man whose world was so different from hers. So what happens now? She asked. Now we go home and start planning our next disaster. Our next disaster? With your track record and my tendency to overcomplicate things, there's definitely going to be a next disaster. I look forward to it. Even if it involves more formal events and social warfare, especially if it involves more formal events and social warfare. I'm getting good at this whole fighting for what I want thing. Yes, you are. As they walked toward the car, Zoe caught sight of their reflection in the hotel's glass doors, her in her midnight blue gown with her hair slightly mussed from his hands, him in his perfectly tailored tuxedo with his bow tie askew, and his usually perfect appearance happily disheveled. They looked like a couple who belonged together, who had found something worth keeping despite all the obstacles in their way. Damon? Yeah? I love you too. The words came out easily, naturally, like they'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to be spoken. Even though I make you go to fancy parties and deal with complicated ex-fiancés. Even though you make me go to fancy parties and deal with complicated ex-fiancés. And even though falling in love with me means your life is about to get infinitely more complicated. Especially because falling in love with you means my life is about to get infinitely more complicated. Damon stopped walking and kissed her again, slower this time, deeper with the kind of thorough attention that made Zoe grateful for the wall behind her back. I love you, Zoe Williams, he murmured against her lips. disasters and all. I love you too, Damon Blackwood. Expensive suits and social complications and all. Ready to go home? Ready for anything, as long as it's with you. And as they drove through the Boston streets toward whatever came next, Zoe realized that sometimes the best things in life came from walking through the wrong door at exactly the right time. 6 months later, when Blackwood Corporation announced the successful completion of the Singapore deal and Zoe's promotion to Vice President of Strategic Development, the Boston Globe Society page ran a photo of them at another charity gala. In the picture, Damon was laughing at something Zoe had whispered in his ear, and she was looking at him like he'd hung the stars in the sky just for her. The caption read, "Local CEO Damon Blackwood and VP Zoe Williams prove that sometimes the best partnerships begin with the most unexpected introductions." Mrs. Ashworth framed the article and hung it in the office lobby, next to a small plaque that read, "In memory of the jade sculpture that started it all." And if visitors to Blackwood Corporation noticed that the CEO's office door was always slightly ajar, and that laughter could often be heard coming from within during business hours, well, some traditions were worth maintaining, even the ones that started with spectacular disasters. The end.